Very kind of you to invite me to talk today, and I congratulate HRK for this very important initiative. For some 20 years now, biannual Bologna ministerial meetings have been reviewing progress in implementing policies to foster student mobility across Europe. And very impressive progress has been made. We have a robust and widely respected quality assurance process across the continent. Funding for mobility, it remains insufficient, of course, but it continues to grow. And the ambition for mobility also escalates. Right now, the European Union is targeting transnational learning by about 50% of the student cohort in the next 8 years. But it's also true that each ministerial meeting has witnessed a lot of hand-wringing about the slow pace of compliance by nations and by institutions with policies that have been agreed, particularly on recognition. And each time there has been a commitment to do better. But there are, of course, many actors in the process of recognition, legislators, ministries, quality assurance agencies, NARICs, and of course, first and foremost among them, our own institutions, our universities, all have to play a part. And so today I have been tasked with considering how university associations and alliances and networks might accelerate the pace towards seamless recognition. And I will focus on the recognition of qualifications and study periods abroad. I will not address recognition of prior learning or of non-formal learning, but these are, of course, also important. Let me paint a picture to begin with of the configuration of university networks and associations across Europe, and I will relate some of the common characteristics of their missions and their goals, and I will outline how each might positively influence the drive towards more efficient and timely recognition. Right now, the largest, the most comprehensive and inclusive association in Europe is the EUA, European University Association. It has some 800 university members from 48 of the 49 countries in the European higher education area. Members that stretch from Reykjavik in Iceland to Tomsk beyond the Ural Mountains. In fact, only San Marino is currently unrepresented, and that is being addressed. EUA also encompasses collective members, the national rectors' conferences of some 33 EHEA countries. 2/3 of EUA members are located within the European Union, and the final statistic is that about 2/3 of members of national associations are also members of EUA. So the organization has a wide remit and a wide reach into the sector. While we are often considered the umbrella body, there are many other university associations and networks. Foremost are the national rectors' conferences, which I've just mentioned. Almost all of them enjoy membership by all universities in their countries. And of course, they're usually focused on domestic matters. But very many of our members, along with some non-EUA universities, participate also in other groupings, sometimes geographically or regionally based. Examples of these would be the Danube Rectors Conference or the Visegrad universities or the Nordic Rectors Conference. And other groups convene around specialized missions. Examples being LERU, leading European research universities, the Guild, the Coimbra Group, and these are all focused, of course, on research. CESAR attracts technological universities. UNICA is comprised of universities in capital cities. Our database at EUA has more than 40 of such groupings, and they vary in scale, but most commonly 10 to 30 members. They're important to this agenda because each is a potential champion of good practice within their groupings. And your program yesterday featured Kees Koenaar who was tasked with describing the work of Aurora on recognition among its university members. A good example. So that's a brief map of the associations in Europe. Now, when it comes to missions and goals, common to all is a set of inward and outward looking objectives. On the one hand, a key responsibility of all associations is to represent the interests of their members to external power holders, to governments, to regulators, and to other societal stakeholders, to optimize the conditions under which universities operate. In our case at EUA, we're charged with advocacy at a European level, a premier target being the European Commission. And likewise, national rectors' conferences advocate with national governments and national stakeholders. A second responsibility for all associations is the inward-facing mission, which is to share good practices among members in a spirit of solidarity, shaping commonly owned policies and guidelines, and sharing expertise through symposia, conferences, webinars, and some staff training programs. There is a third goal, which is, of course, to reach out to peers in other countries and in other continents, engaging in solidarity, particularly with universities in less fortunate regions. And this role can be exploited too as the recognition agenda becomes increasingly a global matter. Within the missions lies opportunity to support the recognition agenda through the outward mission of lobbying and advocacy, and internally by supporting members to discharge recognition responsibilities much better. But here's a question. Does recognition feature currently in the priorities of university leaders and associations across Europe? And my answer is not sufficiently. And I have two pieces of evidence. Earlier this year, EUA published a very important document which we called Universities Without Walls, a Vision for 2030. And it set out the outcome of a year-long consultation with over 100 experts from Europe's universities, academic colleagues from other continents, with governments, the European Commission, the business, the civic sectors. And we invited all to imagine how universities must evolve to serve the needs of society in the coming decade or so. And this draft document was considered and was debated by each national association and was eventually endorsed unanimously by EUA Council, by all the 33 rectors' conferences. And we set out in that vision the need for universities to be open, transformative, and transnational. In fact, I'll quote, universities are communities of learners, of academics, and of professional staff, with open boundaries, including alumni, and a wide range of partners, such as citizens in society. And we state that they will continue to be characterized by being cooperative and networked locally, nationally, and internationally. I end the quote. But very clearly, a sine qua non for this model, an essential prerequisite for Universities Without Walls, is a robust system of recognition of qualifications and of international learning, honoured universally, implemented seamlessly, supporting student mobility, whether real or virtual. But nowhere in this vision document, not even in a specific section on necessary key enablers of the vision, do we specifically identify the role of recognition in enabling transnational networking, or the imperative to take steps to enhance it. And that's not the only evidence that the topic remains too far from the minds of university leadership. A year earlier, 2019-20, we surveyed all of our members as we refreshed the strategic plan for EUA, particularly seeking guidance on priorities for the next 5 years. Each institution was invited to nominate 3 strategically key topics. And we got over 600 submissions. 3 of them mentioned recognition as a key strategic challenge. So the first obstacle to be addressed at association level is the inadequate recognition of recognition, if you pardon my pun, among university leadership across Europe. Raising the profile of recognition among rectors and vice-rectors should be the first step in our sector if we are to see change. And hopefully this conference, organised by HRK, will be an important catalyst. So beyond raising recognition, what other actions might associations take to support the agenda? Well, I'll be guided by the Bologna implementation report from Paris in 2018 and the gaps that were highlighted therein. Let's focus first on the external role of associations, the external mission. So in this regard, I would say that NRCs need to lobby, to advocate for, firstly, the updating of national legislation on recognition and its implementation to align with the Lisbon Recognition Convention, where this has not happened already. It's an obligation for all signatories. But of course, the Paris report shows that there is continuing non-compliance in many parts of Europe. Associations should also advocate nationally to encourage consistency in the operation of any NARICs whose roles, mandates, remits and resources vary considerably between countries. NRCs can advocate for intensified cooperation among the members of these networks, as it is necessary to minimize inconsistencies in practices at individual national levels. NRCs, supported by the EUA, should lobby for the implementation of the EU Council recommendations back in November 2018, that automatic recognition of awards made in EU countries should be in force in all countries by 2025. But as this conference will have heard, barriers to recognition are not uniquely external, or indeed predominantly external to universities. Political support has been evident in most countries for 2 decades now. Fair recognition of foreign qualifications has been a key objective since 1999. And ministers have consistently voiced support for transparency and comparability of education systems and programs. The slow progress cannot be attributed to lack of enabling regulatory frameworks, which is very commonly an issue in the university sector, because legal and operational implementation was backed by the Lisbon Convention, which was established under the Council of Europe, along with operational structures, it might be said, and this was 20 years ago. So in the EHEA, it is the higher education institutions, our institutions, rather than governments, or the NARIC networks, that make most of the decisions in recognizing qualifications and study abroad. Now, it seems a substantial obstacle appears to be obstacles to implementation. They're in the individual universities. And this was highlighted by the Paris report, that there's often a lack of knowledge about recognition practices at the institutional level. And there's also evidence that recognition is not always conducted in line with the Lisbon Convention. So there are some steps that we can take within the universities towards better implementation. One way to start is to put all the actors around a table in each country. Ministries, NARICs, accreditation bodies, student unions, rectors' conferences, and institutions themselves to map the national recognition infrastructure. And this could be initiated too by national rectors' conferences. And the next step is to review how structural improvements can be made to support implementation at national, regional, and institutional levels. Simultaneously, I think university associations could encourage members to include monitoring of recognition procedures as part of the internal quality assurance process within universities. We know, for example, that Standard 1.4 of the Standards and Guidelines for Quality Assurance in the EHEA, ESG, includes recognition as part of admissions processes. And key quality indicators could include information on information management systems, internal feedback mechanisms from faculty to admissions offices, and a procedure based on the convention. Because as we know, what we don't measure doesn't get managed. From my own personal experience in the university sector, it is vitally important to encourage academic staff to delegate decision-making to specifically trained central university administrators. Preservation of the rights of academics, who do enjoy academic freedom, to set entry standards can be protected by ensuring that the rules and the procedures to be applied centrally are co-designed with the academic staff. And thirdly, associations must encourage members to reach out to enigmatic centres for guidance, because they can offer good advice to individual universities. And where resources permit, associations themselves can provide guidance and coordination on recognition to their members. And a fourth idea is that it could be very useful to establish collaboration with national and international peers, often best through forming admission officer networks, sharing good practices and providing mutual support. Now, I know that all good talks conclude with grounds for optimism, and I think that we have three reasons to be optimistic today. Firstly, the conference that you have organised will contribute greatly to raising awareness. Secondly, you will have heard from my colleague, Helena Peterbauer, yesterday, that EUA is working with HRK, with CRUE, the Spanish Rectors Conference, and NUFIC, the organisation that promotes internationalisation in the Netherlands. And together, we have all embarked on an important project to identify the practical challenges to recognition within the university sector, to collate good practices, to share learning, and to identify how we may support members and NRCs to enhance recognition process improvements. This is an Erasmus-funded project. It's called Spotlight on Recognition, and it has already created an academic recognition hub, gathering all the relevant resources on the topic in one central repository. So this is a new enabling set of practical tools for everybody. The third cause for optimism is the arrival of the European University Initiative. For non-European members of the audience, this is a new program sparked by a speech by President Macron of France at the Sorbonne in 2017, and subsequently embraced by the EU Council of Ministers. There's funding from the European Commission, and the program has already created some 41 European university alliances, in which some 280 universities across Europe are already working on deepening collaborations in both learning and research, sharing resources, arriving at new modes of shared governance, and common learning programs, all, of course, driving seamless mobility between their member institutions. The ultimate aim, of course, is new transnational universities. This, I think, will be the single largest enabler of mobility since the establishment of the Erasmus programme. And relevant to today, it has brought a whole new focus, a sharp focus, to challenges in mobility. It's raising awareness and also the need for practical solutions. And I think this will be a game changer. Of course, this is not the end of the story. Student mobility is increasingly globalized, increasingly virtual, and increasingly requiring adherence to the SDGs. And so it's notable that the recent UNESCO Convention on Global Recognition has set new ambitions. Europe's experience, which is almost unique globally, will be crucial to its success. And I'm happy to share here that the major global university associations are already taking steps that will, among other objectives, facilitate that initiative. We at the EUA are taking the lead in the establishment of a new global forum for universities association involving all the major regions of the world. And while that forum is designed to facilitate common approaches to a whole range of global challenges, it should provide a new opportunity to promote common approaches to recognition within the university sector across the world. And it should be a platform to influence legislation and regulation and the design of complementary and collaborative implementation bodies in all parts in similar ways. So we have 20 years of unique experience here in Europe through the Bologna process. Not just experience, of course, but also many mistakes and solutions. And we can and we must share these openly with the rest of the world as we're all trying to create an effective, connected, global community of learning. I thank you for having me. I hope I have set out the level of commitment that we now have within the sector and the recognition that we as associations and networks have a much bigger role to play than we have been doing in the coming years. So thank you very much, and I'll be happy to hear comments or questions in the remaining minutes.
Thank you so much, Professor Michael Murphy, for your keynote on networks and alliances. And indeed, there are a couple of questions who have reached us via the conference chat function. One of them is, can European universities be a catalyst for recognition? You've already laid out the role of European universities, but can they lead the way in some shape or form?
They have to do it. I think the main point I've been making really is that the major barriers now actually reside within the universities themselves. And that is why I think it's probably the thinking behind HRK in organizing the conference that we need to step up to the plate, because for too long we've been hiding behind criticism of governments and of ministries and regulatory agencies for not having the conditions in place to enable recognition. We now know that the reality is that most of the obstacles reside within universities. Now, there are over probably 3,000 to 4,000 higher education institutions in Europe, and we can't rely on each of them independently addressing the problems. And so the idea of having our associations and networks take the lead in shaping and supporting individual universities is the logical way to go. And that's why I congratulated HRK twice in my script on the initiative that you're taking.
Yeah, interestingly enough, it was very evident by yesterday's exchanges and today as well, how similar the challenges are, regardless whether you're in Europe, you're in Latin America, you're in Africa, or even Asia. A lot of overlapping there for sure. There's another question here, is that when recognition is not sufficiently on the minds of universities' leadership, what can be done to shift that focus, and who can do that, realistically speaking?
Well, I'm a firm believer in the philosophy that if you don't do it, it will be done unto you. There is an urgency now for us, the institutions, to tackle this challenge seriously. Otherwise, there will be tighter regulatory and governmental power brought to bear. The associations have a big role to play, and the very fact that I set out to you a moment ago that we hands in the air, we have not been as active as we should have been. That now has to be remedied. So people like me and the heads of the other associations in Europe and around the world have to ensure that this is regularly on the agenda of our meetings and our conferences. And in fact, we probably need to create a system to close the loop that we also can monitor progress as it happens. And beyond that, the fact that I think these the university alliances that are being established under the aegis of the Commission at the moment, they are a very valuable accelerator of change, in my view, because they have been set as stringent targets for joint degrees and student exchange and so on. And they're all working very hard right now to grapple with the challenges. And in fairness, the Commission has also indicated that it will be bringing a list of the challenges to the Council of Ministers to address barriers that are controlled by nations. I think that's the most important thing that's happened in the last 2 to 3 years to add impetus to this agenda. So we all have a role to play, but mainly within the sector.
Let me pose one final question to you before we let you go. Another question here in the chat. What can universities do to improve recognition practices in the short term? Clearly, you've laid out a long-term strategy, but short-term, immediate steps.
Well, short-term, leadership in each institution needs to initiate conversations at the academic councils and the senates to ensure that the decision-making is immediately streamlined within individual institutions. I made the point earlier that a major challenge, and it's certainly been my experience, has been the reluctance of academics to concede the decision-making power to others in the university. Pursuing academic freedom, they have the view that only they can determine whether prior learning or prior qualifications meet the standards of their particular program. That has to change. And we will, and it works very well. There are many good examples of institutions that have centralized it and are more efficient. Ironically, in some cases, because there's a financial incentive, universities in countries that gain fees from visiting students or international students have a financial incentive to streamline because they're in a competitive situation with other universities. But I think leadership in their academic senates need to streamline the processes of upward delegation of decision-making to trained people. That should help significantly.
Professor Michael Murphy from the European University Association, thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for your very insightful keynote on networks and alliances. We very much appreciated having you on. Thank you so much.
Vielen Dank.